Cannabis contains about 500 different chemical compounds. Most people are familiar with THC, the main chemical in cannabis that gets you high, but another important chemical in the plant is cannabidiol, or CBD. Along with THC, CBD is frequently used for medical purposes. The doses of these cannabinoids vary depending on the type of cannabis and how it's consumed. Many people assume that all cannabis is the same, but like wine and hard liquor, the sheer number of options, especially in a legal market, can be overwhelming. Despite the countless strains, all cannabis can be categorized into three main species: sativa, indica, and ruderalis. Many familiar with the plant have heard of cannabis sativa, known for its energetic, stimulating head highs, and cannabis indica, known for its relaxing body highs. But there are also hybrids, which are typically part sativa and part indica. Hybrids are common and offer a body-head high combination that varies depending on the particular strain. Finally, cannabis ruderalis isn't discussed, grown, or consumed nearly as often as the other varieties because ruderalis plants don't get very large and their flowers contain low levels of THC. Each of these cannabis species comes in a plethora of strains with their own effects, tastes, smells, and levels of THC and CBD. Once the type of cannabis is chosen, it can be consumed and prepared in several different ways.
You can smoke it, you can eat it in an extract of food, you can inhale it with a vapor pen, or consume it in an oil form.
Smoking the plant is the most common method of consumption because it's easy and inexpensive. Additionally, pot's effects are almost instantaneous when smoked, and it's obvious when you've had enough. Vaporized cannabis has the same rapid onset and ease of titration while removing possible negative effects of smoking in people with respiratory problems. Another common method of consuming cannabis is oil, which can be eaten, put into capsules, vaporized, or smoked. Oil is typically used for medical purposes or by cannabis enthusiasts seeking a better high. A less common way to use cannabis is topically with cream or ointment. These methods don't cause any psychoactive effects, but work to treat some medical conditions. Finally, eating cannabis is becoming increasingly popular, especially with Colorado and Washington states legalizing the plant. Edible cannabis products like cakes and candies are controversial, however, as it's easy to eat too much and have an unpleasant experience, especially as a novice cannabis user. This is because it can take 30 to 120 minutes for any noticeable effects to occur. Furthermore, cannabis edibles tend to cause a stronger and longer lasting high than smoking. While the effects of smoked cannabis last about 1 to 3 hours, the effects of eating cannabis can last about 6 to 10 hours. According to Mitch Earlywine, a professor of psychology at the State University of New York at Albany, eaten cannabis gets metabolized by the liver, so delta-9 THC becomes 11-hydroxy-THC, which passes the blood-brain barrier more rapidly and has more of a psychedelic effect than standard THC. Smoked or vaporized cannabis bypasses the liver and doesn't create the same 11-hydroxy-THC.
Pulitzer Prize-winning New York Times columnist Maureen Dowd got really high. She was doing some research in Denver after Colorado's legalization of marijuana, and Dowd had a really bad trip, like super bad. Dowd wrote it all up in a recent column.
I felt a scary shudder go through my body and brain.
I barely made it from the desk to the bed, where I lay curled up in a hallucinatory state for the next 8 hours.
I was thirsty but couldn't move to get water or even turn on the lights. I was panting and paranoid, sure that when the room service waiter knocked and I didn't answer, he called the police and had me arrested for being unable to handle my candy. Oh, Maureen.
Of course, she did that thing that nobody smart ever would do, is eat the whole bar, for crying out. If you actually read the labels on bars, and they have labels now, which they didn't in the black market for pot.
As you might expect, Dowd has gotten a lot of response, including from this guy, Matt Brown, described as one of Maureen Dowd's primary marijuana industry contacts in Denver. Brown is the co-founder of My 420 Tours, featuring the Colorado Summer Mountain Cannabis Tour. He showed Dowd around town. As for the burning question, did you, warn Maureen Dowd of how potent those pot edibles can be? The answer, according to the Cannabis, is yeah, man, yeah. She got the warning, Brown said. She did what all the reporters did. She listened, she bought some samples. I don't remember what exactly. Me and the owner of the dispensary and the assistant manager and the bud tender talked with her for 45 minutes at the shop. The article even implies Dowd could have avoided the whole super bad trip if she had just rolled a joint instead. Quote, she got some bud, some edibles, and when we got back to the hotel, she had to run off to a Mitt Romney documentary screening. She asked me, will you roll a joint for me? I don't know how to do it. But she had to run really quickly to the screening, and I was going to catch a flight the next day, and we were going to connect a few nights later, but it never worked out.
But regardless of how uncomfortable an edible cannabis high may be for a newbie, unlike those who consume too much alcohol or prescription painkillers, according to Paul Armentano, deputy director of NORML, they're not going to suffer any long-term potential harm, toxicity, or lethal overdose. It's not as if people are going to the hospital and having their stomachs pumped after using cannabis, he said.
We shouldn't base, one person's bad trip or use of drugs badly.
Okay.
If you had 8 servings of vodka and you were a lightweight and wrote about it, it would be pretty ugly. You'd be vomiting on your shoes.
If you had 8 shots of Patron, if I did, I wouldn't be here right now. I'd be vomiting in Camille's bucket.
You'd be in the ER, actually.
I think
I probably would. But why would you trip alone in your hotel room in the dark? She did so many things wrong here. And the other thing she did wrong that I hold her accountable for this is she took a little bit, didn't wait long enough, and it didn't work. So she took some more and then ate the whole candy bar.
That's classic.
That is the dumb Olympics, and she gets a gold medal.
That's what you do when you're 19, or in her case,
75.
50.
It's worth highlighting that the incentives for the people who are selling these edibles are pretty clear. They don't want to make you sick. They want you to have a pleasurable experience when you buy their products, so you'll come back and get more. I suspect that if these products didn't have the label, she said she wasn't warned at the store, although she did learn about it the next day, that it'll be clearly
By the way,
marked
that's
on the
bad
package.
journalism.
Folks will find out.
That's bad journalism. She did not vet the product. She did not do her
Didn't do her
investigation.
research.
And I'm kind of ashamed.
She binge ate pot. Nick Gillespie, a colleague at Reason, has a good point about this, that this is all actually part of the market discovery process here.
That's right.
And in fact, that's normal. That's what happens. We're going to get rid of prohibition, start legalizing things. People are going to engage in kinds of trials and error. And it's actually helpful to have people write about it and explain it. I mean, if someone reads this and realizes that they shouldn't eat an entire candy bar full of pot, that's not the worst thing in the world. The worst thing in the world, in my mind, is that they read that and come to the inaccurate conclusion that having that thing legally available is worse than having a black market when all kinds of worse things are available.
So when cannabis is consumed, what happens to your body? To put it simply, the cannabinoids travel through your bloodstream to your brain, where the THC fits into receptors that are part of the brain's natural endocannabinoid system. This system helps control an array of functions, like emotions, memory, pain sensitivity, and appetite. Humans and many animals normally produce their own endocannabinoids that fit into these receptors, so by imitating their activity, THC can dramatically alter the same functions. THC also increases dopamine and other neurotransmitter activity in the brain. Dopamine is released naturally in response to food, sex, and other enjoyable things. Cannabis affects everyone differently, and highs can vary greatly depending on tolerance, dosage, method of consumption, strain used, state of mind, and environment. It's also important to keep in mind that while cannabis may alter users in profound ways, the effects are temporary. Commonly, short-term cannabis effects include euphoria, relaxation, altered perception, feelings of well-being, an increased appreciation for music and other arts, introspection, dry mouth, and increased senses, appetite, creativity, and libido. Memory disruptions, a warped sense of time, and paranoia are also possible short-term effects, especially for infrequent cannabis users. According to a 2012 study, THC can also increase heart rate. However, the sample size was a mere 16 male subjects, which is too small to reach an accurate conclusion.
When you first smoke, that is, you light up a joint, a spliff, a blunt, receptors, which are throughout the brain, respond. And these areas of the brain are responsible for things like pleasure, memory, learning, sensation, sense of time and space, coordination, movement, appetite, and other drives, shall we say. So it's sort of an all-over impact, right?
So reward, pleasure, hunger. You have this overall feeling of well-being, they say. That all sounds pretty good.
Other scientific studies have been done on the acute effects of cannabis. Like studies about the long-term effects of weed, potential harm is the focus of most of these studies. For example, a 2013 study found that all cannabis doses caused time over and underestimation in novice users. Conversely, the researchers concluded heavy users do not experience these negative temporal effects. Furthermore, infrequent cannabis users often experience disruptions in memory and spatial navigation, a result of the high number of cannabinoid receptors in the hippocampus and prefrontal cortex of the brain.
Columbia University neuroscientist Carl Hart researched subjects in his lab smoke marijuana and then take a variety of cognitive tests.
The effects will be disruption in memory, disruptions in inhibitory control. They will become slower at cognitive functioning, a wide range of things. These effects are temporary, but they're pretty pronounced and they are clear.
And it's slowly becoming clear to scientists what part of the brain is most affected. It's the prefrontal cortex.
It's very important for planning, thinking, coordinating your behaviors. There are tons of marijuana receptors in this region. And we think that marijuana, particularly in the novice, can disrupt all of those behaviors.
An impairment that Hart cautions could be dangerous, especially when driving. Look at this experiment done by CNN affiliate KIRO in Washington State. Subjects smoked marijuana and then drove. One was a daily medical marijuana smoker, and another, an infrequent weekend smoker.
Relaxed and buzzed.
The more the novice user smoked, the more trouble behind the wheel.
Watch yourself, watch yourself.
But interestingly, the habitual smoker didn't have as much trouble.
I wouldn't pull her off the road, no. No, not yet.
And that's something I witnessed firsthand driving around with 19-year-old Chaz Moore. The day that I spent with him, he had been smoking all day long.
Do you feel impaired at all?
No, I don't. I feel normal.
It turns out when you test people who have a lot of experience with cannabis, you don't see many disruptions. But if you test people who have sort of a limited history with cannabis, you can see some clear, pronounced disruptions.
Additionally, 2 separate studies by researchers at the University of Western Ontario and Vanderbilt University suggest that cannabis may trigger or mute anxiety and fear in users via cannabinoid receptors in the amygdala.
You can get paranoid, you can have disorganized thinking, you get disoriented, it can be uncomfortable, it can lead to panic attacks.
Another common result of cannabis use is increased appetite, or the munchies, which is effective in treating nausea and appetite loss. Once again, this effect is caused by cannabinoid receptors in the brain, more specifically in the hypothalamus, which regulates appetite. In 2014, researchers in France concluded that THC causes users to smell and taste more intensely while mimicking the sensation of starvation in their brains. Additionally, researchers who published a study in 2012 found that dopamine created from THC acts on cannabinoid receptors in a part of the brain called the nucleus accumbens, increasing the pleasure of eating while high. Another positive phenomenon often associated with cannabis use is increased creativity, though the evidence is largely anecdotal.
There's this phenomenon reported by many smokers over the years, especially famous artists, the ability to be more creative.
When you feel that high, there's sort of a release of dopamine, and your brain sort of has the ability now to perceive things slightly differently from the way you might have if you hadn't been smoking pot. What you really see is this reduction in inhibitory function.
A 2001 study found that using cannabis caused no increase in creativity, while a 2012 study by scientists in the UK found the opposite.
Painter Amir, a successful artist, his canvases sell for up to $25,000.
It's my favorite way to work.
Using marijuana.
Yeah.
He's been painting for 14 years, smoking for even longer. He says it makes him feel more relaxed, but most importantly for him, he says it makes him less critical of his own work.
Stop worrying so much about this and that, and just sort of looking and being as present as possible.
Once again, cannabis's effects vary depending on many factors, and novice users should pay careful attention to dosage, especially when eating cannabis. Smoking or vaporizing weed is a better method of consumption for a first-timer. It's also important to remember that any unpleasant effects from too much cannabis are temporary.